thank you all for sticking it through to the end of the day. We will try and keep this fairly quick because, well, actually I pitched it as a 20-minute talk and they gave me a 50-minute slot, so actually it probably will be quite quick. Yeah, thank you for coming. Start off with the traditional things of who I am. I haven't got pictures, I thought you could probably see me. My name's Andy. I am the Chief Design Officer at Pickpock. Used to be called Design Director, and then it was fairly obvious that I didn't direct any designs whatsoever. So Chief Design Officer is the title now. This just means I am the manager, division head representative for design, and design at Pickpock is not the art stuff. For those of us who think of design as creating characters and wonderful looking worlds, that's more our art team. Design for us is a huge gamut of things, from structural design, world building, narratives, balancing economies, even audio, and research as well. Both games user research and market research fall under design. So I've worked in the industry forever, it seems. I'm actually losing track. I think I'm 29 years now. I won't go through everything I've done, but that's some of them. Those are ones I was kind of more intimately involved with. Since Monster Set My Condo stuff, I've been much more at the management level rather than intimately doing production and design, but I still have my fingers in too many pies. I've been a coder and a producer and a designer, and I've run a company, and I've lost a company, and I have experience in many things. I am not an artist, which is another good reason why art isn't part of design.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I am the research manager at Pickpock. So under research we have games user research and market research. And my background's a bit different to Andy's. I've worked in advertising, I've worked in branding, I've worked in big international corporates, and I've worked in fast little startups. I've even worked in fashion, but all these what seem very different disciplines, the thing that's tied that together for me has been figuring out what the customers want, figuring out what they care about, how do we reach them, and how do we design for them. So customer insights is the thing that I'm really passionate about, and it's what I'm going to be talking about a bit later on.
Right, important note, I have done no image accreditation in this at all. I ripped them all off Google Images. I'm saying that up front, sorry. Yeah, if anyone's going to sue me, I can't afford it. So, starting off with, I'm not going to tell you much. This is not one of those talks which says, here's how you do things. It's just trying to make you think of what you already do in a slightly different way, which may skew things as to what you do. There is very few right and wrong answers in this industry. There are just different ways of doing things. So it's quite possible that you're not doing it wrong. And maybe you're even doing what I'm suggesting already. It's certainly what was interesting to me, sort of trip over myself. This started off as a very short conversation. Jane, who was British, decided to sit in the front row so I can point her out. And who was an economist, and we were talking about supply and demand, and it gave me just a different lens on what we were doing anyway. And I thought, there's a talk in there somewhere. That was actually the same day as the NZGDC talks came out. So I decided, let's work it out. Let's work what is one as we're doing it. So, fundamental game design challenges. Should I said this one? Okay, I've got a soundtrack. That's exciting, isn't it? I've got my own theme tune. These are the two things which I'm pretty much sure all of us want to solve at some point. How do we get people to play our games? And how do we get people to keep playing them? I suppose there are some people who don't want people to keep playing them. It's such a tiny one-off experience that it needs to be in some form of pure one-off form. I'm just ignoring that because I can't even think of it right now. But I'm working on the principle that we pretty much all want to do these. Certainly for free-to-play games, which is a lot of Pickpock's bread and butter, the how do we get people to keep playing is vital. But even for commercial games, you still want that. You still probably care. For those who are really tired, I thought I'd sum it up right at the start. The demand part of this is emphasizing that we need to create demand for your game, feature, update, whatever it is with your audience. And the supply is that actually we need to control the supply of what they want in order to maintain the retention. Now, the rest of the talk is going to be much more on the how and why of those things, but that's kind of the what I'm talking about. So, first problem. How do you get people to play your game? This is a huge problem for all of us. There are just too many things. There are a billion games. That's just a random picture of App Store. It's probably well out of date. Random picture of Netflix. I can blame my son for some of those, I'm sure. But, you know, there's a million games across all the app stores, across Steam, PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, particularly if you're on subscription services that, you know, just all you can eat, whatever. And then you go into other media. Everyone's got at least one of the streaming services, but maybe you've got 5, and you know you're completely torn between them. And then there's all the other non-digital media to do. So how do we actually grab people's attention and you know get them to want your game? The usual method, or at least old method maybe, and it's kind of what I'm assuming we all sort of do, is you make a fabulous game. Yay, great. That's the first thing. I mean, if you're making something terrible, I think it's fair enough if people don't want it. But so I'm just assuming you're making a fabulous game, and then you market it in some form. Maybe it's just yelling from the treetops, but you try and tell people about it, and then you hope. You do a lot of hoping, and you cross your fingers. These days, certainly in free-to-play and probably in elsewhere as well, we also kind of look at some KPIs and we analyze it and iterate it, and we try and make our great game greater. And then we market it and push it again and hope some more. And it may work, and it does work sometimes. But I think it's missing something which, as I say, from the purpose of doing this talk, kind of became obvious to me, is that this is all very us-focused, developer-focused. We need to really think much more user-focused and make them really want it, make them demand it, drive the demand to do it. So, theory going that, you know, you've got a user, player, a person who wants a thing, assuming, you know, it could be anything. Could be an emotional experience, could be minor distraction, could be anything. They want a thing. And they hear about a game which is great for doing that thing. And they go, oh, cool, I'll give it a try. And they give it a try, and they love it, and they keep playing it, and they share it with some of their friends on there, and they keep saying other things. And that fact that that person's talking about it means that somebody else hears about it, and they also wanted the thing. And that's the theory, and it all goes around. But it all depends on that the person hears about the game that is great for the thing, whatever that may be.
Yeah, so this is my part. When I hear all these points that Andy's make, the way that I tend to think about it is through this model. So this is a typical path to purchase model, or in the gaming world, the player's path to conversion model. Basically, what this model does is encompasses all the phases a customer goes through from the moment they identify a need. That could be something like, man, I miss my horse back on the ranch in Texas. I wish that I could have a really realistic version of my horse in my pocket at all times on a mobile game. Or it might be that someone has told them about, hey, there's this awesome horse game that I think you would really like, Barbara. You should go and play it. So awareness from a business point of view, you want to think, is anyone aware of our games, and how can they be aware of our games? Normally, it's usually through a friend or family, right? Marketing has some impact, but often it's through a trusted source. So that could be a friend, an influencer. So assuming I'm the customer and I hear about this thing, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds like me. That's definitely ticking some boxes. That sounds great. I want this. You move on to findability. So findability is all about, where do I find out more information? This sounds like something I want to do, so I want to know. There's some pretty fundamental questions that need to be answered quite quickly at this point. It's usually something along the lines of, can I afford this? And is this experience actually what I want? What do the graphics look like, for example? So Steam tags becomes really important. Search engine optimization becomes really important at this point. Next, if you've found all those things, a really important question that people usually ask reputation. Comments and reviews are important, but what's really important is, what do my mates say about this? What does my favourite influencer say about this? Conversion is pretty straightforward. It's basically the point of purchase, right? The most important thing here is that it's frictionless. And then after that, you've got the player experience that begins. From a market point of view, what's really important is advocacy, right? So the player experience, of course, is important, but what you want to happen from that player experience is create advocates. Because if you create advocates, you create people that talk about your game in a positive way, which then filters back positive word of mouth into findability and reputation.
I can just stop now. Emma said it all. We'll get through more slides. So assuming your game actually appeals to someone, and yeah, as I said previously, you know, I'm just making that assumption that theoretically there is a person out there who, if they hear about your game, would like it. If there isn't, if you've managed to create the one thing which nobody in the world is interested in, then tough. Then the big question is, how does that person get to hear about it? Usual stuff, and this is stuff Emma's just talked about, but re-emphasizing, there's word of mouth. This is being told by a friend or whatever, that this is good. There's the sexier version of word of mouth these days, which is the influencers, where you're told about it by someone with lots of likes who's prettier than you. And platform featuring, something we do a lot. This is where the Steam Store or Apple or whatever say, hey, you like this game. Our algorithms say you will like this game. That's a really good thing. Marketing, of course. If you've got the money, you can do that. Review scores, less of a thing these days, but still important when you get to that part of the funnel which sort of where people are judging quality. There are some people still who care about this. Now, the interesting thing here, and the bit which sort of woke me up as I was writing this or trying to form this into a narrative, is marketing and influencers you can pay for. Hopefully you don't have to pay for your influencers, but you certainly pay for your marketing. The others three really rely a lot on luck, unless you're paying your influencer. You know, you've got to be lucky that that influencer just happened to pick up that game and that influencer just happened to say the right thing when the right people were doing it, whatever. You can really sweet talk platform platform producers and whatever, lots and lots, but you're still subject to a little bit of luck as to whether you're going to get there. And likewise on review scores, not only may you be lucky to get your game sufficiently reviewed to make it up on the Metacritic, but also, I mean, I won't rant about it now, but personal experience where I had back in the day in the UK, we had a game which got almost all 90 plus reviews, but it got 1, 2 out of 5, and that was the one the trade press picked up on. So there you go. Unfortunately, that's not what you do. But the thing on here which you can control, and I have to say at Pickpot, we're not doing as much focus on it as I've realized we need to, is the word of mouth.
Yeah, so word of mouth is essentially just people talking about their experiences and stories, right? But it's incredibly effective. In fact, there's a Nielsen study that said that word of mouth, positive word of mouth, is 5 times more likely to increase sales than just paid advertising will do. Bad word of mouth can be a deal breaker, right? That can just be the end of your product. But the reason it's so effective, at the heart of it, is because it's based on trust. There's another study that said 92% of people trust friends and family recommendations over advertising recommendations. And I don't know what the other 8% of people are thinking, because they must have very untrustworthy friends and family, but basically everyone trusts people they know, right?
It's done you. Just hearing about it isn't probably enough, though. As we said, part of the journey is actually getting people off the fence. Actually, can we get them to convert?
Yeah, so like in the that's very fuzzy graphic there. Apologies for that. But in the path to purchase model, the sitting on the fence phase is probably around that point, right? So that's they're aware of the product, they've found out information, their friends have said it's awesome. They still haven't quite converted, right? So marketing needs to work quite hard at this point. It's all about nudging potential customers down that funnel a bit more.
So this is really in the obvious stage, but In fact, Captain Obvious is going to strike. The thing you need to do is really reduce the barriers to entry. This is probably the one thing you must do, I would say, if you have a great game and people may have heard about it and they're umming and ahhing, is just take away the umming and ahhing. Sales, free samples, the drug dealer model is very effective. Just get people doing it. But, and this is actually coming around to the point of the talk again, the thing we don't always think about is a huge factor in getting people off the fence is if they keep hearing about it. I mean, in an advertising world, this is obviously why you keep seeing the same advert again and again and again and eventually switch to a subscription service where there aren't any. But with word of mouth, if you can keep hearing about it, then you're more likely to get someone off the fence. How many times has this happened where someone at work has been talking about a TV show or something that you may have had a passing knowledge of, but not much, but then they started advocating for it and saying how good it was, and then you give it a try, and then you're part of the loop. If you keep hearing about it, then you're much more likely to get other people to hear about it, and those people off the fence. So, if we want people to hear about it, what gets people talking? Slightly worried this slide isn't going to work based on how that looks. Oh no, we do get pictures. No pictures here. Anyway, so we did some pretty ad hoc research at Pickpock a few years ago, looking at what made people share. And we really wanted to try and get our games a bit more virality and get them going out there. This was looking at for different things. There's a few key things and they're really obvious, but we hadn't thought of them, so there. Funny things make people share. They like it, and this is one of the reasons why games whose physics go completely mental and someone's avatar gets shot through the universe gets shared in little GIFs or whatever. Or, people like sharing things which make them laugh. Thrilling things which are exciting, things which drive the adrenaline. A lot of this comes down to the, hey, I really like this, I think you'll like it too type conversations. Showing off, obviously, we've been doing leaderboards for ages. It is a really big one. If people can brag about, hey, I'm great at this, then they talk about it. Depending on your friend network, that can be really effective. Controversy. This is maybe less used than in games than it could be, but if something is a bit just like, ooh, which side of the fence are you on? This is why politics is a dangerous conversation, but it certainly gets people talking. Mysteries, again, very common in TV tropes. This is why people talked about Lost for a long time, just getting completely under and trying to work out the mystery of why they were still watching it. And the sort of nice version of showing off, which is teaching people. It's just like, hey, I'm really good at this, and rather than just bragging about it, I'm going to do a soft brag and show you how to do it instead. It really is powerful if your game can stimulate any of these things. If it is not doing any of this stuff, then you're probably cutting off your nose to spite your face or some similar analogy. And that's what gets people talking. But the previous point is we need to keep people talking. And to keep people talking, it's a bit obvious, we need to keep them playing the game. And so, problem 2, how do we get people to keep playing?
How do you get people to keep playing? You make an awesome player experience. Back to the path to purchase funnel, the player experience starts the moment conversion has happened, right? There is a lot that we can say about an awesome player experience and how to build one. And I touch on that again a little bit later, but at the moment, this is looking at the very start of it, right? So at this point, your customer has done research, talked to their friends, they've hyped it up, they've watched the trailers, they've watched some gameplay demos. There's some expectations that need to be met, and they need to be met fast at this point.
So this is, again, apologies if you're in the firmly anti-free-to-play mode, but this is kind of how we tend to think about things, or have done, is we look at KPIs, we look at how things are doing, what the numbers say. Look at our downloads, that's a really obvious one. In free-to-play, that is literally just how many times it's been downloaded. Obviously, the number of purchases potentially if you're a premium model. But that's only one number, because that doesn't actually tell you that much. We've all, I say all, I certainly have, I know several people have, downloaded games, got a ton of games on their Steam library which they've never booted up. And maybe you talk about it at some point in the conversation of, hey, I've got so many games on my Steam library I've never started. But outside of that, that's not a terribly great bit of advocacy. So the real thing we want to look about is the engagement, which is actually getting people from downloading it. We've got that one hurdle out of the way. I should obviously point out, if you're a premium game, you may not care about this. You may have just gone, fine, we got your money now, go away. But certainly, it would help for the advocacy if people talk about the game. So the engagement is just that first experience. Are they actually playing the game? Are they getting excited about it on that very first play? And then that goes to retention. Do you actually keep people around? Apologies for the terms that we use all the time. Retention. And retention is really, really important because retention does that. It drives monetization. It gets people to spend in a free-to-play thing, and it gets people to talk about it. It gets people opportunities to share it. If they're retained in the game, if they want to keep playing, then there is a higher chance of them talking about it and spending, which in turn is a higher chance of somebody else downloading it, purchasing it, and a higher chance of boosting the retention of themselves, because actually the more people are talking about the game, the more the conversation is going around. Which comes to our often trite thing heard, which is retention is king. It's like, okay, yeah, great, whatever. And so a lot of our focus is like, oh, retention is really important. How do I improve retention? And this is when my second revelation came in, is that that's the wrong question. We shouldn't be asking, how do we improve it? We should be kind of switching our thinking. It's all very us. It's all very, how do we improve our retention? No. What we want to do is, how do we stimulate demand? How do we make people want it more? It's just a different lens on the same thing, but I think it's something we don't do enough. So why do people play games? Why do people want this stuff? Trite answer, dopamine. You've heard that lots, and you do good things, your brain goes, yay, good things, and you want more of that, and you do stuff. And yeah, okay, that's fine. Doesn't really give you a lot of detail. There are lots of reasons why people play games, and they don't have to do all of them. Could be escapism, could just be mindless fun. You've got to kill time, back to that bragging thing. You want the rewards, you want social interaction. Certainly, my son plays most of the games he does purely because he can use it as a sort of free phone to talk to his friends en masse. Self-expression, more and more things we're seeing that way. And they are all really powerful. And if you can target your game to give it, if you know your audience, and you can say, our audience really wants this sort of thing, then, theoretically, you can give them more of what they want, which should mean that they stick around. So, how can you know what they want? Well, a common one, and one I think we all do, is we can just assume it. We go, this is a good idea, I think it's a good idea, but other people will think it's a good idea. And I don't think that's wrong, because assumption is actually based on a lot of prior knowledge. It's based on a lot of observation of other games, other people's experience. But, it can trip you up some far, particularly if you're going really niche. You can be blatant. You can just copy somebody else. And actually, to be honest, in the shooter world, I think this is probably almost universally done. It's like, shooter games are really, really successful, so we're going to make a shooter game which is almost like all the others, but just slightly different. And that's really powerful. And if you get it right, and you get the just slightly different, and people talk about it, awesome. So it's not a bad thing either. But the thing, and one of the real reasons why I roped Emma into this, is because it all boiled down to research. You can actually find out.
You can find out. You can try and find out. That's what I try to do. One of the main reasons we do research is we want to know who we're making our games for, right? And I really can't stress this enough, know who you're designing for. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about trying to understand your players, but it's all about collecting data, right? I could go into the methodology, but I won't. Frankly, it's not the most interesting part, but the whole point is that you are collecting data and facts to have a fact base in which to make evidence-based and informed decision-making. But facts and data isn't enough. You also need to have empathy. And empathy is really important because, one, it gets you in the mind of the player, but two, it keeps you aware of your own biases as well. Making a game for yourself is appealing, but not always that commercially viable, right? So there's no perfect way to think about your customer. At Pickpock, we use this model. It's a Quantic Foundry motivational model. It's online. I highly recommend you check it out. They seriously know what they're doing. Quantic Foundry created this empirical model using psychometric methods, which basically meant they developed these 12 motivations, which helps us understand what really drives gamers. So every game or every gamer has a combination of these motivations going on. That's probably another speech that I need to give, but this is one really useful way that we think about our customers. This one?
Yeah, big one.
Cool. The other point that I think is really important with research is that it's not a one and done situation. It's an ongoing process. A game, it might start with an abstract concept or idea, and that's the same thing with your audience. You have a bit of an abstract idea of who your audience is, but as you develop your game, you need to develop your understanding of your players. And in fact, it's sort of a bit of a loop, right? The more you understand about your game, the more you can understand about your players, and the more that can feed back into your game, and so on and so on. But research, just like design, is a journey of learning and iterating. It increases confidence and it reduces risk, but it can never guarantee success, unfortunately. But really, the whole reason we do research is so we can know our players, so we can make an awesome player experience, so we can retain those players, and so they turn into our advocates.
So, we know what they want. So, we want them to keep playing. So, let's give them more of it. As I say, yeah, maybe, sort of, no. If you give them more of what they want, they'll stick around, is a theory. And it's called a content strategy. You just keep making lots and lots of content that people want. And, it sort of works. Give them lots and lots of more, and people can keep talking about it. This is why, again, back to TV shows, there are many episodes of some of them. People keep wanting them, and you can keep making more of them because people keep wanting them until people lose the plot because it jumped the shark too far. From a development point of view, obviously this is a hell of a treadmill. Not necessarily what you want to be doing all the time, but it's a very separate talk to say about how can you make lots of content cheaply and how can you keep people around without making content. For the sake of this conversation, a strategy is a content strategy where you just keep on giving the player more of what they want, which research has told you what they want. Theory. Is it the answer? Of course not. It's an answer. And this is where the conversation started all those slides ago, that actually we need to balance supply and demand. All we've talked about there was demand. Now, traditional supply and demand, proper economic one, is all about price and quantities and looks something like that, where if you have lots of a thing and not many, and lots of people want it, then it's got one price, and if you've got very few of a thing and lots of people want it, it's got a different price, and so on and so forth. That's kind of like, sort of what I'm talking about, but it's more this. If you need to sort of manipulate your supply in order to keep demand high. Because if you have too much supply, there's a chance that people will burn out due to boredom or exhaustion. It's just like, there are games, even on the premium games, I'm not playing, and they're even starting playing that because you're saying it's 147 hours long. It's just like, no. People keep telling me I should get into Game of Thrones, but there's a lot of it, and it's just like, it's a little daunting sometimes. It can be a good thing, maybe not, particularly when the end of the series apparently is dreadful. But also, if you don't give them enough, they can churn you to frustration. So it really is about balancing your supply. A few analogies. Apparently, if you go and work at a chocolate factory, they let you eat as much as you want off the conveyor belt, because after the first day, you don't. You're just not interested in it anymore. It was there, you're too much, you are no longer a customer for what you're making. And that's that. Controversial one, a few gamers out there. I think Mario Kart gives you far too much too soon. It's a brilliant game, but it gives you everything pretty much when you first boot it up. I mean, there's a few different types of vehicles you can unlock, but pretty much you get all the speeds, all the tracks, all the everything right at the start. So you dip your toe in, you get an experience, but I don't know, you don't hang around in it for months and months and months trying to work your way through it, trying to explore it. And whilst it is recognized as a great game, I don't think it was the talking point it could be. You can argue with that on that one with me later. Netflix, and indeed a lot of the streaming platforms, they were all about the content strategy. People talked about Netflix when it came out because you can get all this stuff right now. There's just tons of it, and you can get it all instantly. But they realized after a while that this, you know, it's really expensive to keep that amount of content going all the time. But to keep subscribers, you want to keep people talking about it. And actually just keeping talking about, and there's lots of it, is not necessarily stimulating all those different bits of conversation. So they've started moving their key series, Stranger Things being an obvious example, but you're seeing this on Disney Plus with the Marvel shows and whatever, to episodic, back to good old TV styles, have it once a week. And this keeps people talking about it for longer and longer and longer, gets them contemplating the mystery. Where is this going? They can't just binge watch the next episode straight away and get the answer. They start those conversations at work with other people. They try and drag other people into it so they can have a wider conversation. And so by controlling the supply of what they're giving, they can actually keep people talking about it for longer. I mean, you can go too far the other way. Wordle, stupidly successful, obviously, limits supply down to you can play this once a day. And, you know, it's been very successful for them. You know, they do talk a lot about it. But, again, I think you could argue that it's almost gone too far because people who play Wordle quite probably play Quordle, maybe play Octordle, maybe Hurdle, and whatever the other ones are, because they enjoyed it, but they actually weren't getting enough of what they wanted. Now, in this case, he made $1 million from New York Times. He probably didn't care. But certainly, if you're trying to do a game which keeps people around for a long time and doesn't risk losing itself to another person in the market, you want to not limit it too much, but limit it a bit. Now, how to limit supply is absolutely another massive, massive talk. So I just got a few little bits on this one. Really obvious stuff. Daily limits. Wordle takes it to the extreme. Other forms of timers, which can be anything. Just come back after a while. These are all very free to play. People are groaning. Energy, which is just another form of timer, but kind of expressed as a currency. But to nod to games from all over time, just locking content based on people's progress. This is what Mario Kart 8 doesn't do. It's just like if you actually say you've got to achieve this in order to get the next thing, it limits the supply based on effort. You then combine these things and go, and you can only try so many times a day, and you've got people playing for a long time, potentially, providing they want what you're dangling in front of them. So, stating the obvious once more, you limit the supply, you've got them demanding it, and then you limit it, but if you limit it too much, they're going to go away. So you do need them to keep coming back. And the way you do that, again, coming around in circles, you can dangle carrots. Come back because it's a good thing. You can provide options. This is slightly different. This is saying you can't play one game mode because you've already played it a lot, but you can maybe try these other things. You can remind them. That's pretty useful. That's push notifications and various other ways. But, and this is again where I come round to the thing I realised we're not doing as well as we should do, is we keep up the word of mouth. Keep making your players advocate for the game. Keep them talking about it. And the more you can do that, the more people who are into the idea stay into the idea and the conversation goes. Don't have all the answers to how to drive this. Obviously, previous things, we can research what they want, we can keep them doing it. But if we actually think about the importance of this and we don't go, hey, adding a sharing function is an afterthought because we've got to do it, because it's actually, this is core to keeping people retained in our game, then I think it changes our thinking quite a lot. Breathe. Takeaways. I know, I had to put a pun in there. I'm a dad. Really all I'm after is people looking at things differently. You're looking at it one way, which is, hey, we want to improve our retention, and instead we actually just go, actually, how do we make the players demand more, and then how do we control it so they want to stay around? Change your focus. Not about KPIs, which is all about us. I mean, yeah, they're important, it's how we measure things, but just the focus from, instead of improving that number for me, how about make them want more? Word of mouth, vitally important. And as I say, as Chief Design Officer, writing this, realized I am not advocating for this enough. So my poor designers in this room are going to experience me advocating for this more. But keep control of supply, because if you give them to it all the time too much, then you'll lose them. Because give them a reason to come back. Obvious. And the word of mouth thing is a key thing there, because it's a loop. Loops, loops, loops. You need players. You need players to play your game, to give you money, to keep you alive. To get the players, they need to hear about the game. If they don't hear about the game, they won't play it. But to keep the players, the game needs to keep satisfying their needs. Without being boring, without being too frustrating. A little bit of frustration, obviously, because it's good to, depending on the game, to get past those hurdles can make people feel good. And I guess a little bit of boring can be good sometimes because you want to relax, but it's again that balance. Because to get more players, the game needs to make them want to share it and stream it and talk it. Both. We are 15 minutes early. We can go home, or you can ask me some questions. Someone who doesn't want to go home.
Not yet. I could go back through panels to, I think, some other options. There.
Boom. Boom.
What do you think about modability for games? Since modding is like, it's not by you, it's by other people, but because they make mods for your game.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, creative expression there, you're in the full, which is a key thing, reason people play games.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a pretty hardcore strategy people going into in this one, obviously. You know, people are wanting to, they've got to love your game enough that they want to work out how to mod it. And then they want to love, and then they think they have their idea and they want to do their own form of self-expression.
Well,
but it's great.
The question is like, is this something you should probably maybe think about while you make a game, like make it modding friendly?
Yes, I suppose is the question. I mean, is the answer. Yes, you should. But there is always a cost you've got to consider. How much extra is it going to cost you to make it modding friendly? If it's not going to cost you much, if you can do it and it's easy to do and you can make it great, then absolutely do it, because it gives you new options. Long time ago, we made a weird racing game at Pickpock. It was called She then, and a core part of the pitch was it was going to have a track editor. I appreciate that's not modding, but it's still user-generated content. And it was going to have a track editor that the players could use. It actually made it incredibly great for development, because we actually produced good tools for a change, because actually we'd said we were going to do this thing, and now we had to make it usable by end users, which made it incredibly usable for us. So which way we had hundreds of levels in the thing, because we could do it really fast. But it was, as you say, right at the start, it was part of the pitch. We were going to have this as a thing. If we weren't going to have that, we would have probably, it would have been really hard to retrofit. I can't say whether it actually, back in the days before KPIs, I can't say whether it actually added stuff. But in terms of providing options, absolutely. If someone's done playing the game, maybe they want to start making their own variation on it. I think that'd be a cool thing if you can do it. But I would, you just look at your economics. If it's really going to cost you 3 times more to make it shareable than it is to make it not shareable, see if it's successful first.
Just in the providing options, the modability, the user-generated content, would you consider build diversity in, say, an RPG to be a form of user-generated content where
It's certainly a form of creative expression.
drags people back in, because all of a sudden you see, wait, how did they actually, like, you see some gif of someone, you know, throwing 12 fireballs in a single shot, and it's like, wait, how did they do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Into the game to figure out.
And whatever it is, I mean, the point of this is whatever it takes to get someone talking about it. That's not necessarily going to work for everybody, but it's going to work for some people. And if that creative expression is going to get someone showing off their amazing build to their friends or their followers or whatever, then that's all you're after. So again, I mean, it's trite to say it, but you do have to pay attention to how much it's costing to add in time or money or however your company measures such things, but to add the creative expression features, and does it really fit what the audience wants? But hence the research stuff. You can actually say, yes, really, I go back to Quantic Foundry somewhere, where was it?
Yeah, I mean, one way of thinking about if it's worth it is, does it align with the vision of the game, and does it align with what the customers want? And if it does, if it's a core value proposition of the game, then yeah, invest in it. If it's not, then it's worth considering, but considering in that context.
Yeah, it's in the creativity, design, expression, and customization is actually a whole big chunk of an audience. Not necessarily the audience of this game, for your game you're making, but potentially there is a segment of the audience who are really into that, and if you delve into that because it's worth it, then cool.
I was just wondering on the supply and demand side, how do you know if you got it right? How do you measure it?
Well, honestly, I don't know right now. As I say, this started off as a conversation of realizing what I wasn't doing. And actually it took, one of the reasons this started off as a short talk was it was a short conversation. And I thought, hey, there's something here. But in trying to form it into some form of narrative I could actually talk about, it made me just think about it more and more. And I don't know if you can think you've got it right. Obviously, you can iterate. These days, it's not put a game on a shelf and wait to make the sequel. For the most part, whatever platform you're on, you can do some form of updates and try and improve things. And you will measure stuff and see where it goes. And you could talk to your audience. Games user research can very much happen post-launch. Find out what your audience wants. Trawl the forums, trawl the Reddit pages, whatever else. Find out what people are after, what they're complaining about, and make leaps and make billions of dollars when you know how to do it. I suppose the reason I kind of wanted to talk about this was because although it all seems very, very obvious now, we've downplayed design at PickPock, I should say, not universally, but we have downplayed how important word of mouth is. And because it always feels like it's not as important as making the great game. But actually I'd say it's as important. Because if people don't hear about your great game, it doesn't matter. Two hands, that one first.
With these player types, would you say there's like a sweet spot for the number that you should be targeting per project?
Haha, Emma, go in.
Sorry, what?
Like, is there like a sweet spot for the number of these player types that you would be targeting per project? Like, you don't want to go too far and you get spread.
Yeah, you're probably making a game that, look, every game might have an element of this. But yeah, maybe leaning into 2 or 3 of those motivations is probably the right way to do it. The way that we think about it is it's on a spectrum, right? So everyone is either motivated or demotivated by all of these, right? So with Rival Stars horse racing, for example, excitement is a really important motivation, but not at the top end of the spectrum, at the lower end of the spectrum for some of our segments. So they are there because they want an idyllic, tranquil experience. So thinking about these all on a spectrum, and some of them dialing them up, and some of them dialing them down, and some of them just being sort of in the middle, it's just enough to satisfy, is usually how we think about it. But yeah, in terms of focus, probably 2 or 3 and leaning into those, although I haven't got specific research to back that up.
Yeah, just expanding on that, I think I think it's just quite a scary place to say, let's make a game. We don't know anything about what the game we want to make is at all. Let's pick an audience and see what we can find. It's doable. It's definitely a place you can start. But chances are for most people here, you'll have a vision of a game that you want to make, which is based on past experience or some assumptions or initial market data, but there might be something out there. And as that starts to form up, you'll learn more about your audience. And then it comes down to that questions like, do you put in modding tools or track things or stuff like that? If creativity is actually really quite important, whether it's builds or whatever like that, to that type of audience, you've done the research and you go it is, then it may well be really key. And if it's not, if they're all about just blowing shit up, then give them more blowing shit up. Oh, sorry.
Just two things. One was the lens of supply and demand is really interesting because I mean I play a lot of League of Legends and there's always this debate on one of their most popular game was Earth. They only introduce it periodically. It's never always on. So that's an interesting lens to see and understand why they might do that. But the question I had was for both demand and supply, it looks like a big emphasis on research and kind of understanding players. You know, in traditional tech, there's kind of like a product manager or UX researcher. Obviously, in design, there's so many. In game design, sorry, there's so many more elements. Like there's community, there's game designers. Where should how should this research team form? Or there's a data team. You know, how does that? How do you build out that kind of muscle to start getting these insights, iterating and learning and finding that sweet spot of supply and demand?
I'm going to let Emma really speak to this, but I should say you don't need to build out a big team. But obviously, the more information you can get, the more you can use it. Up to a point, you may drown in that information and consequently struggle with indecision at some point. But our research team has built very slowly. We had just games user researchers. They were called usability testers beforehand, or usability experts. And then we moved into more research beyond just do people understand how to use the buttons, to try and understand, do greater surveys and try and really understand what experiences people wanted who were already playing the game. And it became really apparent to me that this was great. You know, we could find out what people who were already playing the game knew, but we didn't know what the people who weren't playing the game might want. And I hired Emma because she knew more than I did.
Yeah, like building this team. I guess it's really the product team that sort of pulls in resources. But something that we're thinking about in research is, do we remain a centralized sort of advisory team, or do we embed people? Because it's really important that we understand the wider context. Doing little bits of tactical research and then fetching numbers and saying, here you go, it's not that useful, or it's not as valuable as it could be. So the benefit of embedding people is that you can get more strategic context, we can be more aligned around the vision, and you can identify opportunities along the pre-production or production roadmap to really add value and plan around it. Not sure if that answers your question fully.
I do have one follow-up question.
Sure.
It's a bit more tactical, but is there like a favorite research method, like focus groups, play tests?
My favorite?
Yeah.
I really like interviewing people. So I was one of those people that always, as a kid, was why, right? Like my ideal job is to be, I love the idea of interviewing people, dive into people's minds, the psychology of how they work and function. And so I get to ask people why they like to kill zombies, or why do they want kittens to explode, or what, it's really fascinating. So that's my personal favorite methodology, but it's not always the most appropriate. Yep.
Thank you.
Right, I think we're about time, so it is time for people to go home. Thank you very much.